The train hissed as it rolled into Dustwater Station, slicing through the quiet like a blade. The whistle scream scattered a flock of crows from the telegraph wires, black silhouettes tearing across a pale afternoon sky. Wind stirred dust and dead leaves across the platform as the train brakes groaned, iron screeching on iron. He saw her before she stepped off. A woman in a faded wedding dress, hem darkened with soot and travel grime. She clutched a small suitcase to her chest and scanned the station platform, like someone hoping this was all a mistake. It wasn't. Thomas Baird watched from across the street, leaning on a hitching post outside the saloon. His boots were scuffed, his duster sun-faded, and the beard on his jaw hadn't been trimmed in weeks. But his eyes, those were sharp, observant, tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from living too long with ghosts. The woman stepped onto the platform. Alone, no welcoming party, no groom with flowers, not even a pitying soul from the town to greet her. Just wind, dust, and a mule that brayed once before going quiet. She stood there for a long moment, her shoulders stiff and face set, like she was daring the world to laugh. Then she moved to the bench, sat down and placed the suitcase beside her. Her veil, still pinned to her bun, fluttered in the breeze. "Hell of a place to be stood up," muttered Emmett Clay beside Thomas, spitting into the dust. Thomas didn't answer. He just kept watching. Inside the saloon, laughter floated through the batwing doors. Cards slapped tables. Whiskey was poured, and someone plucked at a banjo off-key. The town went on living because that's what towns do. They don't stop for heartbreak. Not unless someone makes them. Thomas finally pushed off the post. His boots crunched gravel as he crossed the street, each step slow but sure. The sun was low behind him, casting long shadows across the platform. The woman looked up just as he neared. Up close, she was older than he expected. 39, maybe 40. Her features had once been soft, pretty, but time, worry, and perhaps a few too many betrayals had sharpened them. Green eyes, deep lines at the corners from either smiling too little or crying too often. "You're scaring off the pigeons," she said dryly before he could speak. Thomas tilted his head slightly. "You waiting on someone?" "I was." Her voice had the soft drawl of Tennessee. "He didn't come." "You surprised?" She gave him a long look. "No, but I was hoping I might be." He nodded once, then turned as if to go. "Something I can help you with, mister?" she asked behind him. Thomas paused, turned back. "What's your name?" "Clara Jane Monroe." "You got family?" "No." "You got money?" "About 17 cents and a broken brooch." He stared at her. She stared right back. Then he said it. "Marry me?" Silence, sharp as a knife's edge. The wind held its breath. Clara blinked. "I'm sorry. Don't make me say it again. I ain't a man who likes repeating himself." She laughed once, bitter and startled. "You drunk?" "No." "Crazy?" He considered. "Maybe, but I got a ranch, a roof, and no one to share either with. I buried my wife 2 winters back, and been talking to ghosts since. I figure you're tired of being left behind. I'm tired of being alone. Seems fair." Her mouth opened, then closed. "Twice. You don't even know me." "I know enough. You came here with a wedding dress and no one waiting. That tells me everything I need." A shout broke the moment. 2 cowhands across the street had spotted them. One elbowed the other. "Hey, Tom." She say yes, or you gotta beg harder. Laughter. Loud. The sort that sticks to your ribs. Clara's face tightened. Her fingers curled over the suitcase handle. Thomas turned, slowly. The cowhands shut up before he even took a step. One mumbled an apology, hat tipping low, and they both disappeared into the saloon. Thomas turned back. "You got any other options, Clara Jane?" She looked around, at the empty platform, the burnt sky, the blistered horizon stretching out in all directions. "No," she said softly. "No, I don't." "Then come on." He held out a hand, work-worn and steady. "Let's go find a preacher before I change my mind and head back to talking with ghosts." She stared at his hand, and she took it. They were married less than an hour later. in a clapboard church with a leaky roof and a one-eyed pastor who asked no questions. She didn't change out of her dress. He didn't change at all. The only witnesses were a kid who worked the stables and a woman named Rose who sang too loud and wept like she was giving away her own daughter. Thomas gave Clara his mother's ring, gold band slightly dented, still warm from his pocket. And when the ceremony ended, he walked her out of that church, hand in hand. Dustwater watched. Every window had eyes behind it. Every porch had a whisper. But Thomas didn't care. And Clara, well, she lifted her chin like a woman who just dared the whole world to doubt her. The wagon ride back to his ranch was mostly quiet. Cattle watched them pass, tails flicking. The wind blew dry through the trees. Clara spoke first. "Your wife. You loved her." "Yes." "She died sick or sudden?" "Sudden. Childbirth." "I'm sorry." He nodded. Then she asked the question that hung heavy in the air. "You gonna compare me to her?" Thomas looked straight ahead, reins loose in his hands. "She's dead, Clara. I ain't about to dishonor her by pretending she still fills the chair at my table. And I won't dishonor you by making you live in her shadow." Clara leaned back in the seat, letting the silence breathe between them. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had dipped behind the hills, casting gold over the tall grass. The house was simple, whitewashed, with a porch and chimney and shutters half-hanging. Fences needed mending. A single lantern flickered in the window. Clara stepped down from the wagon, her boot catching on the hem of her dress. She stumbled. Thomas caught her by the arm. "Warned you about that board," he said, dry as dust. She snorted. "Yeah, keep that tone up, and you'll be back talking to ghosts come Monday." They both smiled, just barely. Inside, she took stock of the place. It smelled of old wood and cold iron. Dust coated everything. A kettle sat on the stove, untouched for days. Thomas lingered at the door, unsure. Clara turned to him. "You got whiskey?" "In the cabinet." "You mind if I drink the rest?" He shook his head. "Be my guest." She poured herself a glass, then another. Finally, she exhaled and sat on a creaky chair, suitcase still by her feet. Thomas watched her for a long time, then took off his hat and placed it on the table. "You don't have to prove nothing to me, Clara. Not tonight. Just sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out what we are." Her voice, when it came, was quiet. "I'm not young, Tom. I got things in my past that don't sit right. You might regret this." He looked her in the eye. "I've regretted a lot of things, but not kindness. And not tonight." Outside, coyotes howled. Inside, two strangers sat in the dim, the flicker of lantern light dancing between them. Not lovers yet, not quite partners, but no longer alone. And for the first time in years, Thomas didn't hear the ghosts. Just a woman with tired eyes, sitting at his table. And maybe, just maybe, the sound of something beginning. The morning came hard and cold. A layer of frost clung to the window panes like nature's warning, and the fire in the hearth had long since dwindled to glowing coals. Clara stirred beneath the quilted blanket on the parlor sofa, stiff from sleeping half sitting up, her wedding dress still hanging from a nearby hook, drying from its hurried wash. Thomas was already outside when she opened her eyes. She could hear the sharp ring of a hammer, the thud of boots on dirt, the low grunt of a man who'd been working long before sunrise. No greeting, no breakfast, just the sound of motion. She stretched, her body aching in new places. Then she set to work. By the time he came in, sweaty and dust-coated, the kitchen was warm, the table set, and bacon sizzling in a skillet. Clara didn't look up as she flipped the strips with a steady hand. "You got eggs?" she asked. He blinked. "Couple dozen." "Good. You'll need them. You eat like a man who's been living on jerky and regret." He chuckled, unexpected and low. "Ain't wrong." Clara turned just enough to meet his eye. "Then maybe you'll sit down and let someone cook for you before your bones give out." He did. They didn't talk much during breakfast. She watched him eat like a man unaccustomed to real food, and he watched her like she might vanish if he blinked too long. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't awkward, either. It was something stranger. Like two people trying on new skins, Not quite sure they fit. Later that morning, the town got its second shock. Thomas rode in with Clara seated beside him, hat pulled low, hair braided and pinned up like a proper wife. She wore one of his late wife's old dresses, altered quickly the night before, and a leather satchel slung over her shoulder. The murmurs started before they hit the general store. That the bride? She's older than she looks. Didn't think Baird would marry again, not after her. Wonder what she's hiding. Clara heard it all. She didn't flinch. Thomas didn't say a word either. Just hitched the wagon, took her arm, and walked her into the store like they'd been married 10 years already. Inside, Miss Rullian watched them over her glasses, suspicious eyes glinting like a hawk's. "Mr. Baird," she said. "Twice in 1 month. Must be a full moon. Need flour, salt, 2 bars of lye soap, and a new kettle." Miss Rullian raised a pencil brow. "You planning to feed the whole county?" Clara stepped forward. "No, ma'am. Just one man. And he eats like 3. Rullian gave a thin-lipped smirk, but rang them up without more questions. As Clara reached for the change purse, Thomas stopped her with a quiet hand. "My coin, Clara." "But—" "My home. My rules." Their eyes locked for a beat. Then she nodded. Outside, Thomas noticed the sheriff watching from across the street, arms folded, leaning on the railing of his office porch. Sheriff Klein wasn't a man to smile much. He wore his badge like armor, and he'd served long enough to know which fires burn fast, and which ones burn the whole damn barn. "Tom," Klein called, "can I borrow you a minute?" Thomas handed Clara the bag of goods. "Wait here. Won't be long." Klein didn't waste time. "You sure you know what you're doing?" This woman shows up in a dress with no family, no escort, no explanation, and you marry her before she unpacks her suitcase. Thomas didn't blink. "I ain't a skin your blessing, Klein. I'm not giving it. I'm a skin if you're ready to deal with whatever trouble is going to come looking." Thomas leaned close enough the sheriff could smell the dust on his collar. "Whatever comes, I'll deal with it." Klein stared for a long time. Then he nodded once. "Just don't let your heart write checks your rifle can't cash." Back at the wagon, Clara had gone quiet. Her eyes weren't on Thomas. They were fixed across the street, on a man leaning against a saloon wall, smoking a cigarillo and watching her with a crooked smile. Billy Voss. He was a wiry, mean-looking bastard with slick hair, yellow teeth, and a mouth that never shut. But it was his eyes that troubled Thomas, sharp, narrow, and dangerous in that way snakes are when coiled too still. Thomas followed her gaze. "You know him?" Clara's lips pressed then. "I did. Once." "Before or after he earned that limp?" "Before." They climbed aboard the wagon and said nothing more, but Thomas noticed how her hands tightened on the edge of the seat, white-knuckled all the way back to the ranch. By evening, the quiet of the prairie settled around them again. The chickens were fed, the gate repaired, and Clara was brushing dust from the curtains while Thomas checked the barn. That's when he found it. A note, nailed to the barn door with a jagged piece of scrap iron. The words were scrawled in cold pencil, slanted, angry letters. "She ain't who she says she is. You married a lie. Don't say we didn't warn you." Thomas read it once, then twice, then folded it in half and shoved it into his pocket. Inside the house, Clara was stirring a pot on the stove. It smelled of stew and pepper, and something he hadn't felt in a long time. Comfort. He didn't show her the note. Not yet. Instead, he poured water into a basin, washed his hands, and sat at the table. "You ever lie to me, Clara?" he asked casually. She froze, then turned slowly. "Why?" "'Cause I don't care what you done before. I care what you'll do now." She stared at him, brow furrowed. "I got a past," she said finally. "Parts one ain't proud of. But I came here to start over. To be better. You planning to run?" "No." "Then we're square." They ate in silence, but it wasn't a cold silence. More like two people drawing a line in the sand and choosing, quietly, to step over together. After dinner, Clara sat by the fire, sewing up a torn pillow with careful fingers. Thomas smoked outside, eyes on the darkening sky, the stars flickering like sparks ready to fall. Somewhere out there, trouble waited. He could feel it. But for now, just for tonight, he let himself breathe, let himself believe that maybe this strange, dusty arrangement might work. Maybe, if she didn't run, if he didn't retreat, if whatever was coming didn't come too soon. And behind him, in the quiet warmth of the house, Clara began to hum, a soft southern tune. Old, sad, lovely. He didn't know the words, but he knew the feeling. The ghosts were quiet again. For now, the juniper trees stood like old sentries in the moonlight, their branches twisted and still. Shadows stretched long across the hard-packed earth. Coyotes sang somewhere out on the ridge, their high, keening notes dancing with the cold breeze that whispered through the canyon. It was the kind of night that kept secrets close, and buried bones even closer. Thomas had ridden into town earlier than usual that day. A part of him wanted to speak to the sheriff about the note, but he hadn't. Something held him back. Call it instinct. Call it pride. Call it the whisper of his dead wife in the back of his skull, saying, "Handle it yourself, Tom. No one else will." He left Clara at home with strict instructions to keep the rifle near and the doors bolted. She'd simply nodded, chin high, eyes unreadable. She didn't ask questions. Not anymore. But by sundown, he could feel it in his bones. Something had shifted. He returned just after twilight and found the front gate open. That gate never stayed open. His heart kicked hard in his chest. He rode in slow, eyes scanning, hand hovering near the revolver on his hip. The chickens were quiet, the windows unbroken. The front door closed, too closed. He dismounted and crept up the porch. The boards groaned under his boots. Inside, the house was silent, lamp burning low, the pot from supper still warm. And Clara was gone. No note, no sign of struggle, just a growing scream in his chest. He stepped outside again, jaw clenched. Then he saw it, tracks in the dirt, 2 sets of boot prints, one deeper than the other, one that dragged slightly like a man with a limp. Billy Voss. The name lit up inside his head like a struck match. The bastard had taken her. Thomas didn't shout, didn't scream. He just saddled his horse again, loaded his rifle, and followed the prince north, toward the canyon, toward the junipers, toward the place where the land grew quiet and the moon rose sharp and silver. Clara's wrists ached from the ropes. They'd tied her too tight and dragged her too far. Her cheek was scraped raw, her dress torn, but her eyes burned with fury, not fear. Voss had dragged her out of the house with the help of 2 men she didn't recognize, throwing threats like punches. "You don't get to vanish, Clara," Voss hissed as they rode. "Not after what you cost me." "What I cost you," she spat. "You think beating a man's soul out of him in a back alley makes you a victim?" He struck her then, hard, but even with blood in her mouth, Clara didn't scream. Now, under the juniper trees, they tied her to a post beside a long-dead fire pit. Voss paced like a caged animal, his limp more pronounced under the moonlight. One of the men stood watch, sipping from a canteen and chuckling now, and then like this was all some lark. The other one stood silent, arms crossed, eyes sharp. He looked like a hired killer, the kind who didn't care who lived or died as long as the pay was good. "You don't know what kind of man you married," Voss said, kneeling before Clara. "You think Thomas Baird some noble widower? That man's got blood on his hands. You think I'm bad? He's worse. Then why are you the one who needed 2 dogs to take me?" she whispered. Voss's smile twitched. "Because I wanted him to follow. Wanted him to see what happens when a man tries to take what's mine." A sound came then, soft, like metal sliding from leather. All 3 men froze. Thomas stepped into the clearing slow, deliberate, rifle in one hand, revolver at his side, eyes locked on Clara, not the men. "You all right?" he asked. "Was hoping you'd bring a knife," she replied through a bruised lip. He tossed one toward her feet. Then he turned toward Voss. "Let her go." Voss grinned. "Now hold on, Tom. We're just having a reunion. Old friends and all. You got 30 seconds. Or what?" Voss sneered. "You'll shoot me in front of witnesses?" Thomas cocked the rifle with a smooth, unhurried motion. "Ain't seen a witness here yet." The man with the canteen dropped it, drew fast. Thomas shot faster. The bullet took him in the throat. He went down hard, choking on surprise and blood. The silent one stepped forward. Cool, calculating. He raised his gun. Thomas dropped to one knee and fired twice. One hit the man's leg. The second took him in the chest as he fell. No cries, just a thud and a puff of dust. Only Voss remained. He scrambled behind Clara, gun at her temple, using her like a human wall. Back off, Baird. Thomas didn't move. You think I won't do it? Voss snarled. I will. I'll paint this canyon with her brains. Clara's eyes were calm. Thomas said nothing. Then he spoke, low and cold. I believe you. He fired. The bullet tore through Voss's hand. He howled, dropped the gun. Clara twisted, grabbed the knife from the ground, and slashed the rope binding her to the post. Voss lunged for her. Clara buried the blade in his side. He screamed again, staggering back, eyes wide with disbelief. You! She didn't let him finish. She yanked the knife free and struck again, quick, brutal, precise. By the time Thomas reached her side, Voss was gurgling in the dirt. They stood there, breathing hard, covered in dust and blood, moonlight painting the world in silver and shadow. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her. Torn dress, shaking hands, but standing tall, fierce. Sorry I was late, he said softly. Clara dropped the knife. You weren't. They didn't bury the bodies. Left them for the coyotes and the cold. By dawn, the wind had picked up, scattering dust over bloodstains. They rode home in silence, side by side. When they reached the ranch, Clara stopped on the porch. She turned to Thomas, voice low. I didn't marry you for safety, Tom. I didn't marry you for peace. She nodded. Then, quietly, she said, But I'd kill for you. And Thomas replied, You already did. The juniper trees whispered behind them. Blood had been spilled. Vows had been tested. And something stronger than law had taken root beneath that pale morning sky. Something that wouldn't break easy. The fire crackled low in the hearth as Clara cleaned the blood from her hands. Outside, the sky was still black, but the faintest silver had begun to bleed across the edges of the horizon. Dawn wasn't far now. Thomas sat in his chair, shirt off, shoulder bandaged from the graze he took during the ambush in the canyon. The wound stung, but he didn't complain. He hadn't said much at all since they returned. Just watched Clara, eyes tracking her like he was trying to memorize every motion. She moved with purpose, scrubbing, packing, repacking. He'd seen that look before, long ago, in the eyes of women who'd lost everything and refused to lose anything more. You planning to leave? He finally asked. She didn't look up. I'm planning to survive. That ain't the same thing. No, she agreed. It's not. Silence. Then, without turning, she said, I know Voss wasn't alone. That kind of man never is. Thomas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You know who else is coming? No, but I know what they'll want. Revenge? No, they'll want to finish what he started. Not just to hurt me, but to make an example. Thomas's jaw flexed. Then we don't wait. We make the example first. She turned, met his eyes. You're not a killer, Tom. He shook his head. No, I'm a man who married a woman worth killing for. They didn't sleep. The next few hours passed like the ticking of a watch you couldn't see but felt in your bones. They cleaned rifles, reinforced the doors, hid powder and shells behind curtains and chair legs, laid traps at the fence line. If war was coming, they'd greet it standing tall and side by side. Just after midnight, the wind shifted. The coyotes went quiet. Then came the hooves. 4 riders, black coats, blacker intentions. No torches, just moonlight glinting off their rifles. They came slow like they owned time. Thomas and Clara waited inside, crouched behind overturned furniture. I'll take the lead, Thomas whispered. You cover the porch. Clara nodded once. The knock came sharp. 3 raps against wood. A voice followed. Calm. Southern. Too polite. Mr. Baird. I'd like a word. About a mutual acquaintance. Thomas didn't answer. You killed Billy Voss, the voice continued. Now, I'd call that justice. But the man you killed wasn't acting alone. He worked for someone, and that someone has a reputation to maintain. Still no answer. You give us the girl, the voice said, and we walk away. You keep her, well, you'll both be ghosts by morning. Thomas cocked a rifle. The porch exploded in gunfire. One of the blackcoats fired through the window, which splintered. Clara dropped to her belly and returned fire to the crack near the doorframe. The bullet caught a rider square in the gut. He toppled backward, horse screaming and bolting. Thomas stepped out the side door, moved wide, flanked them. His first shot hit a second man in the shoulder. The second tore through his chest as he fell. The third turned wild-eyed and fired back. Missed by inches. Thomas didn't. 3 down. Only the voice remained. The leader. He stood at the base of the porch, gun drawn but lowered. Pale-faced, clean-shaven, young. Too young to be carrying death so calmly. He met Thomas's stare with a half-smile. You're good, he said, but you're not smart. Thomas raised a rifle, but the boy didn't move. Instead, he said, You ever hear of Emma McCrae? Thomas paused. The name landed like a rock in his gut. Clara stepped onto the porch, rifle trained. Her voice was flat. Don't say it again. The boy smirked. There she is. Emmett's dead, she said. The boy's eyes twinkled. Sure, and so were you. Thomas looked between them. Clara? Her shoulders tensed. McCrae was the man Voss worked for. The one I ran from. The one who put a bounty on my life for leaving. I shot him once. Thought it stuck. It didn't, the boy said. Clara raised the rifle. He smiled wider, then reached into his coat. Thomas didn't think. He fired. The shot took the boy in the chest. He staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief, collapsed in the dirt without a word. Thomas walked down the steps, stood over the body, watched for breath. There was none. He turned back to Clara. She hadn't moved. The rifle still clenched in her hands. You all right? He asked. She nodded slowly, then dropped the rifle. The world went still again. A breeze pushed dust across the porch. A lark sang, soft, lonely. Clara knelt in the dirt beside the boy's body. She pulled a letter from his coat, opened it, scanned the words, then tore it in half and dropped the pieces into the wind. I won't run anymore, she said. Thomas walked over and pulled her up, his hand warm and steady. You're not alone anymore. They buried the men in shallow graves on the far edge of the property, marked them with nothing. When it was done, Thomas lit a cigar and sat beside Clara on the porch. They didn't speak for a long time. The sky turned soft above them. Faint pinks and yellows bled into the horizon. A new sun began to rise. And as the first full rays touched the land, Clara leaned against his shoulder and whispered, You still glad you married a stranger? He smiled into the morning light. You're not a stranger anymore. She reached down and laced her fingers with his. Neither are you. They sat like that until the sun cleared the hills, and the ghost stayed quiet. If you felt something in this story, something raw, something real, don't keep it to yourself. Like, subscribe, and tell us what you do for love in the comments. The frontier always remembers those who fought for second chances.